The burning started 3 days before Zelda Warren finally collapsed behind the general store, her fingers clutching at the wooden planks while sweat poured down her face, despite the mild October afternoon in Brownsville, Texas. She had been hiding it for weeks. The pain that had begun as a dull ache and transformed into something that made her bite down on her own sleeve to keep from crying out. But now, her body had decided it would wait no longer. Samuel Foster was loading supplies onto his wagon when he heard the thud, a sound that cut through the usual afternoon noise of horses and wagons and distant conversation. He dropped the sack of flour he had been carrying and rounded the corner to find her there. A young woman he had seen around town but never properly met, curled on her side with her arms wrapped around her middle. Her face was pale as milk, her dark hair plastered to her forehead, and her blue eyes were squeezed shut against whatever agony was tearing through her. "Madam," Samuel knelt beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly. "Madam, can you hear me?" Zelda's eyes fluttered open, and the moment she saw him, shame flooded her features. She tried to push herself up, tried to wave him away, but her arms gave out beneath her. "Please," she whispered, "just go, I am fine." "You are not fine." Samuel's voice was gentle but firm. He was 26 years old, had spent the last 8 years working cattle ranches from Montana to the Mexican border, and he knew the difference between a stumble and genuine distress. "You need a doctor." "No." The word came out sharp, almost panicked. "No, I cannot." "Please, just help me up and I will go home." Samuel studied her face, saw the terror there mixing with the pain, and something in his chest tightened. "Where does it hurt?" Zelda's cheeks flushed red and she turned her face away. That was answer enough. Samuel had 3 sisters back in Kansas, and he understood immediately the kind of shame that kept women from seeking help, the intimate nature of ailments that society demanded they suffer in silence. "Listen to me," he said quietly, moving closer so no one else might hear. "Whatever is wrong, it is hurting you badly enough that you just fell down behind a store. That means it is serious, and serious things do not get better by pretending they do not exist." When she still would not look at him, he added, "My name is Samuel Foster. I have been working the Morrison Ranch for 2 months now. I am going to help you, and I am not going to let anyone make you feel ashamed about it." Something in his tone must have reached her, because Zelda's eyes met his again, searching his face. She was 23, had been living in Brownsville for just over a year, working as a seamstress and keeping mostly to herself. The pain had started small, something she could ignore, but it had grown into a monster that consumed her thoughts and left her trembling. "I cannot walk," she admitted, the words barely audible. "I tried this morning, but every step feels like knives." Samuel did not hesitate. He slipped one arm under her knees and the other around her back, lifting her as carefully as he could. She gasped, her body tensing, and he froze. "Tell me if I am making it worse." "Everything makes it worse," Zelda said through gritted teeth, but she did not ask him to put her down. Instead, she let her head rest against his shoulder, too exhausted and too desperate to maintain her pride any longer. The doctor's office was 3 streets over, and Samuel walked steadily through town with Zelda in his arms. People stared, of course they did, and he could hear the whispers starting behind them. Let them talk. He kept his eyes forward and his stride even, focused only on the woman who had begun to shake against him. "I am sorry," Zelda murmured against his shirt. "I am so sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for," Samuel replied. "Being sick is not a sin." Dr. Martin Hayes had been practicing medicine in Brownsville for 15 years, and he looked up from his desk with surprise when Samuel carried Zelda through the door. "Set her on the examination table," he said immediately, rising and washing his hands in the basin by the window. Samuel carried her into the small back room and lowered her as gently as possible onto the padded table. Zelda's fingers caught his sleeve, her grip surprisingly strong. "Do not leave," she whispered, and there was such vulnerability in her eyes that Samuel felt his heart crack open. "I will be right outside the door," he promised. "The whole time. I am not going anywhere." Dr. Hayes appeared in the doorway and Samuel stepped back, letting the physician take over. As he moved toward the door, he heard Zelda describing her symptoms in a halting, embarrassed voice, talking about pain and bleeding and symptoms that made her face burn with humiliation even as she forced the words out. Samuel closed the door behind him and took up position in the chair directly beside it. The waiting room was empty except for him, the afternoon light filtering through the curtained windows and painting everything in shades of gold. He could hear the murmur of voices through the door, the doctor's calm professional tone and Zelda's quieter responses, and he found himself listening not to the words but to the cadence, making sure she was still conscious, still talking. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Samuel stayed exactly where he was, his hat in his hands, his shoulders squared like he was standing guard. In a way, he supposed he was. When 45 minutes had elapsed, the door finally opened and Dr. Hayes emerged, wiping his hands on a cloth. "She has a severe infection," he said quietly. "Female trouble, complicated by what I believe started as a minor issue she chose to ignore. It has progressed to the point where she needs significant treatment and rest." "Will she be all right?" Samuel asked, standing. "With proper care, yes. But she will need to stay off her feet for at least 2 weeks, and she will need medication that I am afraid is quite expensive." Dr. Hayes paused. "She tells me she has no family here and she lives alone. That is going to be a problem." Samuel looked at the closed door, thinking of the way Zelda had gripped his sleeve, the way she had begged him not to leave. How much for the medication? $15 for the full course of treatment. It was more than a week's wages, but Samuel had been saving carefully. "I will pay for it." Dr. Hayes raised his eyebrows. "You do not even know her." "Does not matter." Samuel pulled out his billfold and counted out the bills. "She needs help and I can provide it. That is enough." The doctor accepted the money with a nod of approval. "She can be moved, but carefully." "Does she have someone who can care for her?" Samuel thought of the boarding house where he rented a room, thought of his landlady, Mrs. Patterson, who had nursed half the town through various ailments. "I will find someone." When he entered the back room, Zelda was sitting up on the examination table, still pale but with some of the tension gone from her face. She looked up at him, and her eyes immediately filled with tears. "You stayed." "I said I would." Samuel approached slowly, aware that she had just been through an ordeal. "Dr. Hayes says you are going to be fine, but you need rest and medicine." "I heard him tell you the cost," Zelda said, her voice breaking. "I cannot let you pay that. I do not even know you." "Already done." Samuel kept his tone light. "Now we need to get you somewhere you can recover properly. Do you have friends who could take you in?" Zelda shook her head and fresh shame colored her cheeks. "I have not made many connections here. I work, I go home, I keep to myself. I have always been that way." Samuel made a decision in that moment, one that would change both their lives, though he did not know it yet. "I rent a room from Mrs. Patterson on Oak Street. She is a widow, former nurse, and she has extra space. I will take you there, and I will pay for your room and board until you are well enough to work again." "Why?" Zelda's voice was almost a whisper. "Why are you doing this for a stranger?" Samuel met her eyes, those blue depths full of pain and confusion and something that looked like hope. "Because I found you when you needed help, and I am not the kind of man who walks away from that. Because you deserve to be cared for with dignity. Because it is the right thing to do." He paused. "And maybe because you are not quite a stranger anymore." Something shifted in Zelda's expression, a wall beginning to crack. She nodded slowly. I will pay you back, every cent, I promise. We will worry about that when you are better. Samuel held out his arms. Ready, the ride to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was mercifully short, and the landlady took one look at Zelda and immediately ushered them inside. She was a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, and within minutes, she had Samuel carrying Zelda up to a small but clean room on the second floor. I will need to check her bandages and make sure she takes her medicine on schedule, Mrs. Patterson said, already rolling up her sleeves. You did a good thing bringing her here, Samuel. Over the next week, Samuel found himself visiting the boarding house every evening after work. He would knock softly on the door and Mrs. Patterson would let him in, updating him on Zelda's condition. For the first 3 days, Zelda was too weak and feverish to do much more than sleep, but on the 4th day, she was sitting up when he arrived, a book in her lap. Samuel, she said, and his name sounded different in her voice, warmer somehow. Mrs. Patterson said you have been coming every day. Had to make sure you were healing properly. Samuel took the chair beside her bed, his hat in his hands. How are you feeling? Better. Zelda set the book aside. The pain is much less, and I can stand for a few minutes without feeling faint. Dr. Hayes came by this morning and seemed pleased with my progress. That is good news. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Zelda said, Will you tell me about yourself? I realized I know almost nothing about the man who saved my life. Samuel smiled, a slow spreading warmth that lit up his weathered face. Not much to tell. I am from Kansas originally, grew up on a farm with 3 sisters and 2 brothers. Started working cattle when I was 18, and I have been moving from ranch to ranch ever since. I like the work, like being outside, like the freedom of it. Why did you leave Kansas? My father and I never saw eye to eye on much. He wanted me to take over the farm, settle down with a local girl, live the life he had lived, but I wanted to see what else was out there. Samuel leaned back in the chair. What about you? You said you had been in Brownsville for a year. Where are you from? Zelda's expression grew more guarded. Louisiana originally. New Orleans. My parents died when I was 19, yellow fever. I had an aunt here in Texas who offered to take me in, so I came west. But she passed away 8 months after I arrived, and I have been on my own since. That must have been hard. It was. It is. Zelda looked down at her hands. I am not used to depending on anyone. I learned early that I could only truly rely on myself. That is why I waited so long to seek help, why I let things get so bad. I thought I could just endure it, work through it, that eventually it would pass on its own. And now, Samuel asked gently, now I am learning that maybe pride and self-sufficiency are not always the same thing. Maybe sometimes asking for help is not weakness but wisdom. She met his eyes. Thank you, Samuel, not just for the money or for carrying me to the doctor, but for treating me like I mattered, like my pain was important enough to warrant attention. Something in Samuel's chest tightened. You do matter, Zelda, very much. The days turned into a week, and then 10 days. Samuel's visits grew longer, their conversations deeper. He learned that Zelda loved to read, that she had a talent for sewing that went beyond simple mending, that she had once dreamed of opening her own dress shop. She learned that Samuel wrote poetry in a battered notebook he carried in his saddlebag, that he missed his sisters terribly, but wrote them letters every month, that he had a scar on his shoulder from a bull that had thrown him in Wyoming. On the 11th day, Zelda was well enough to come downstairs for dinner. Mrs. Patterson had invited Samuel to join them, and the 3 of them sat around the small dining table while the landlady served stew and fresh bread. Watching Zelda eat with genuine appetite, seeing color back in her cheeks and light in her eyes, Samuel felt something settle in his soul that he had not even realized was restless. After dinner, he and Zelda sat on the front porch while the sun set over Brownsville. The October air was cooling into November, carrying the scent of wood smoke and coming winter. "I will be able to return to work next week," Zelda said. "Mrs. Henderson, who runs the dress shop, has been kind enough to hold my position. I spoke with her yesterday." "That is wonderful." Samuel meant it, but part of him felt a strange sadness at the thought of their daily visits ending. Zelda must have sensed it because she turned to him, her expression serious. "Samuel, I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." He nodded, suddenly nervous. "These past 11 days have been the strangest of my life. I have been sick and vulnerable and dependent in ways I swore I would never be again. But they have also been some of the best days I can remember, because you have been here. You have visited me every single evening. You have talked with me and listened to me and made me laugh even when I felt terrible. You have shown me a kindness I did not know still existed in this world." She took a breath. "I think I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know that before I lose my courage." Samuel stared at her, his heart pounding so hard he was certain she could hear it. "Zelda, I know it is fast," she continued quickly. "I know it is probably foolish. You do not have to feel the same way, and it will not change the fact that I am grateful for everything you have done. But I have learned recently that hiding things, ignoring things, pretending they do not exist only makes them worse. So I am telling you the truth, even if it is frightening." Samuel reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "I have been trying to figure out how to tell you the same thing," he said quietly. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment you grabbed my sleeve and asked me not to leave. Maybe even before that, when you tried to send me away even though you could barely move, because you did not want to be a burden. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met, and every day I have spent with you has only made me more certain that finding you behind that store was not coincidence but fate." Zelda's eyes shimmered with tears, but she was smiling. "Really, really." Samuel stood and pulled her gently to her feet, mindful of her still healing body. "I know we have not known each other long. I know people will say we are rushing. But I have spent 8 years wandering, looking for something without knowing what it was. Now I know. It was you. It has always been you, I just had to find you." She reached up and touched his face, her palm soft against his jaw. "What do we do now?" "Now," Samuel smiled. "Now we take things slow, we court properly. I take you to dinner and dances and church socials. We learn everything there is to know about each other. And when the time is right, when you are ready, I am going to ask you to marry me, and I am going to pray you say yes." Zelda laughed, the sound bright and free. "I think you might be waiting a very long time for that answer." "I have nowhere else to be." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and Samuel felt the last piece of himself click into place. This was home. Not a place, but a person. This brave woman who had been too ashamed to ask for help until her body gave her no choice, who had trusted him to stay outside that door and been vulnerable enough to let him in after. The next month unfolded like a dream. Samuel continued working at the Morrison Ranch, but every spare moment was spent with Zelda. He would meet her after she finished at the dress shop, and they would walk through town together, talking about everything and nothing. He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, and she laughed at his stories about stubborn cattle and unpredictable weather. She showed him the dresses she was making, and he marveled at the intricate stitching and careful design. On Sundays, they attended church together, and Samuel endured the curious looks and whispered speculation with his head held high and Zelda's hand in his. Let them talk. He had nothing to hide and everything to be proud of. In December, The first cold snap hit Brownsville, unusual for southern Texas but not unheard of. Samuel arrived at Zelda's new small apartment, a place she had been able to afford now that she was back to full-time work, with a bundle of firewood and a determined expression. "You do not have to take care of me anymore," Zelda said, though her smile belied any real protest. "I am fully recovered, earning my own wages, managing just fine." "I know you do not need me to," Samuel replied, stacking the wood by her small fireplace. "But I want to. There is a difference." Zelda watched him work, affection clear in her eyes. "You are unlike any man I have ever known. I will take that as a compliment. It is the highest one I can give." She moved closer, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Samuel, I have been thinking." "About what?" "About what you said on Mrs. Patterson's porch, about asking me to marry you when the time was right." She paused. "I think the time is right." Samuel turned in her embrace, his heart suddenly racing. "Zelda, I love you," she said simply. "I love you more than I thought I could love anyone. You have shown me that being vulnerable is not weakness, that asking for help is not failure, that letting someone in does not mean losing yourself. I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to build something real and lasting with you." Samuel cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had begun to slip down her cheeks. "I do not have much to offer you. I am a ranch hand with some savings but no property of my own. I cannot promise you a grand house or fancy things." "I do not want grand houses or fancy things," Zelda said. "I want you, just you, exactly as you are." He kissed her then, deep and tender and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Zelda Warren. Make me the happiest man in Texas." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Brownsville, with Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Hayes serving as witnesses. Zelda wore a dress she had made herself, simple but elegant in cream-colored silk, and Samuel wore his best suit with a new tie. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed his bride like she was the most precious thing in the world, because she was. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a place Samuel had been able to rent with an option to buy. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a porch, but Zelda made it beautiful with curtains she sewed and furniture they acquired piece by piece. Samuel continued working at the Morrison Ranch, but he spoke with the owner about his future, about his dreams of having his own land someday. "You are a good worker, Foster," Mr. Morrison said one afternoon in February as they mended fence. "One of the best I have had. If you are serious about buying land, I have 40 acres on the north edge of my property I might be willing to sell. It is good grazing land, has a creek running through it. You could start small, build up a herd, make something of yourself." Samuel felt hope flare bright in his chest. "How much?" They negotiated over the next week, and finally struck a deal that Samuel could just barely afford with his savings and a loan from the bank. The day he signed the papers, he rode home to tell Zelda with his heart full to bursting. She was in the kitchen when he arrived, and the moment he walked through the door she knew something significant had happened. "What is it?" "We have land," Samuel said, sweeping her into his arms. 40 acres, Zelda, it is ours. We can build a real house, raise cattle, create something lasting." Zelda laughed and cried at the same time, clinging to him. "I cannot believe it. We have been married barely 2 months and already we have land. We do. And I want to build you the house you deserve, the kind of place where we can raise a family." Samuel pulled back to look at her. "That is, if you want children." "I want everything with you," Zelda said. "Children, a home, a life, I want it all." They broke ground on the new house in March of 1884. Samuel worked his regular job during the day and labored on their house in the evenings and on Sundays, with help from some of the other ranch hands who had become friends. Zelda continued her seamstress work, saving every penny toward furnishing their future home and building their herd. By summer, the house was taking shape. It was modest by some standards but palatial to Samuel and Zelda, with a large main room that would serve as kitchen and living space, 2 bedrooms, and a real porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Samuel built Zelda a sewing room in the back where she could work on her projects, with large windows to let in plenty of light. One evening in July, as they sat on the unfinished porch watching the sunset, Zelda took Samuel's hand and placed it on her belly. "There is something I need to tell you." Samuel looked at her, saw the mixture of joy and nervousness in her expression. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," she said softly. "About 3 months along, the doctor thinks." Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Really? A baby? Really?" Zelda smiled. "Are you happy?" Instead of answering with words, Samuel stood and pulled her to her feet, spinning her in a careful circle before kissing her thoroughly. "Happy does not begin to cover it. I am ecstatic, thrilled, overwhelmed." He kissed her again. "We are going to be parents, we are," Zelda agreed. "And I am terrified and excited in equal measure." "We will figure it out together," Samuel promised, "just like we have figured out everything else." The house was finished by October, just in time for them to move in before Zelda's belly grew too large for her to help much with the process. They hosted a small gathering to celebrate, inviting Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Hayes and some of Samuel's co-workers and their families. Standing in their completed home, surrounded by people who had become friends and family, Samuel felt a contentment he had never imagined possible. That night, after everyone had gone and they lay together in their new bed in their new house on their own land, Zelda turned to Samuel. "Do you remember the day you found me behind the general store?" "Every detail," Samuel replied, stroking her hair. "Why?" "I was so ashamed that day. So certain that my life was ending, that I had made too many mistakes and waited too long to seek help. I thought I was going to die alone behind that building, and that would be the sum total of my existence." Her voice grew thick. "And then you appeared, and you refused to let me give up. You carried me to help even when I begged you not to. You stayed outside that door like you were guarding something precious. You treated me with dignity when I felt I had none left." "Zelda, let me finish," she said gently. "What I am trying to say is that you saved me that day, but not in the way I thought. Yes, you got me medical care, and yes, you probably prevented the infection from killing me. But more than that, you reminded me that I was worthy of being saved. You showed me that I did not have to face everything alone, that vulnerability could lead to something beautiful rather than just pain. You gave me back my life, and then you gave me a whole new one I never dared to dream of." Samuel kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You saved me too, you know. I was drifting before I met you, going through the motions but not really living. You gave me purpose, a reason to put down roots, a home in every sense of the word. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you," Zelda whispered. "I love you too," Samuel replied. "Always." Their son was born in February of 1885, during a mild winter that felt like a blessing. Samuel paced outside the bedroom while Mrs. Patterson attended the birth, his heart in his throat every time Zelda cried out. But when he finally heard the baby's wail and Mrs. Patterson called him in, the relief and joy that flooded through him nearly brought him to his knees. Zelda lay exhausted in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, but her smile was radiant as she held their son. "Come meet your boy," she said softly. Samuel approached slowly, almost afraid to touch something so small and perfect. The baby had a shock of dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and when Samuel held him for the first time, He understood in a wholly new way what it meant to love someone with your entire being. "What should we name him?" Zelda asked. They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Samuel knew. "Thomas. After my grandfather, the one who taught me to ride and to work with my hands. He was a good man, the kind of man I hope our son becomes." "Thomas Foster," Zelda tested the name. "I like it. It is strong but kind, just like his father." Thomas thrived, growing into a chubby, happy baby who smiled easily and rarely fussed. Samuel would come in from working their land to find Zelda sewing with Thomas in a basket at her feet, or singing to him while she cooked dinner, and every time the sight hit him with fresh wonder. This was his family. This was his life. He had helped build it with his own two hands, and it was more valuable than any amount of gold or cattle or land. As the months passed, and Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Samuel and Zelda's herd also grew. They started with 5 head of cattle purchased with careful savings and slowly built up to 20, then 30. It was not a large operation, but it was theirs, and they worked it together with pride. Zelda had not given up her seamstress work entirely, but now she took on only special projects, elaborate dresses for weddings or special occasions that paid well, and allowed her to work from home while caring for Thomas. Her skill had become known throughout the county, and she often had waiting lists of clients. On Thomas's second birthday, as they celebrated with a small cake, Zelda had baked and a carved wooden horse Samuel had made. Samuel pulled his wife aside. "I have been thinking," he said. "That is usually dangerous," Zelda teased. "I am serious. I have been thinking about how far we have come in these 4 years, about everything we have built together, and I realized something." He took her hand. "I am exactly where I want to be. I do not want to expand the herd so much that I am never home. I do not want to work myself to death building an empire. I just want this, our family, this life we have created. Is that enough for you?" Zelda's eyes softened. "Samuel Foster, you have given me more than I ever dreamed of. A home, a family, love that I feel every single day. You do not need to give me anything more. This is already more than enough. I want to give you everything you deserve." "You already have," Zelda said firmly. "You gave it to me the day you refused to walk away from a sick woman you did not know. Everything else has just been us building on that foundation together." They kissed while Thomas tugged on Samuel's pants leg, demanding attention, and Samuel laughed as he scooped up his son. "What do you think, Tom? Is our family perfect just the way it is?" Thomas giggled and grabbed Samuel's nose, which was apparently answer enough. As 1887 turned into 1888, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Samuel had been promoted to foreman at the Morrison Ranch, which meant better pay and more respect. Their own small herd continued to provide supplemental income. Zelda's sewing business flourished. Thomas grew into a bright, curious 4-year-old who followed his father everywhere and watched his mother sew with fascination. In the spring of 1888, Zelda came to Samuel with news that surprised neither of them given how often they still reached for each other in the night, their passion undiminished by time or familiarity. "I am pregnant again," she said, and this time there was no nervousness, only joy. "Another blessing," Samuel said, kissing her. "Thomas will be excited to have a sibling." Their daughter was born in December as the year drew to a close. The labor was easier than with Thomas, and Samuel was allowed in the room for the last part, holding Zelda's hand as she brought their daughter into the world. When the baby cried, small but fierce, Samuel felt tears stream down his face. "A girl," Zelda breathed, reaching for her. "Oh, Samuel, we have a daughter." She had Zelda's delicate features but Samuel's brown eyes, and she stared at her parents with an intensity that suggested she was already taking the measure of the world she had been born into. "What should we call her?" Samuel asked. "I want to name her Sarah, after your oldest sister," Zelda said. "The one who writes such kind letters and sent that beautiful blanket for Thomas. I want our daughter to have that connection to your family." Samuel felt his throat tighten. He had not seen his sisters in 10 years, though he wrote faithfully and they wrote back. "Sarah Foster," he said. "It is perfect." Thomas was skeptical of his new sister at first, unsure what to make of this small creature that cried and demanded so much of their mother's attention. But gradually his curiosity won out, and he became fiercely protective of her, always wanting to know where she was and if she was all right. The years continued to roll forward, marked by seasons and harvests and small victories. In 1890, Samuel finally saved enough to buy their house outright, no longer beholden to a mortgage. They celebrated quietly, just the four of them, but it felt monumental nonetheless. In 1892, when Sarah was 4 and Thomas was 7, Zelda surprised Samuel with a visit from his sister Sarah, who had traveled all the way from Kansas with her husband and 2 children. The reunion was tearful and joyous, and for 2 weeks their house was full of laughter and shared stories and children running in packs. "She is wonderful," Sarah told Samuel one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You're Zelda. I can see why you fell in love with her." "I am a lucky man," Samuel agreed. "She told me how you met," Sarah continued. "How you carried her to the doctor and stayed outside the door, how you paid for her treatment and found her a place to recover. That is exactly the kind of thing you would do, you know. You always had the biggest heart." Samuel shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone should have done." "But most people would not have," Sarah said seriously. "Most people would have walked away, would have decided it was not their problem or too much trouble. You saw someone who needed help and you helped them, no questions asked. That is who you are, Samuel, and I am proud to call you my brother." After Sarah and her family left, the house felt too quiet for a few days. But life had a way of filling empty spaces, and soon they were back to their routines, the comfortable patterns of a family that loved each other deeply. In 1894, when Thomas was 9 and Sarah was 6, Samuel took his son on his first real cattle drive, just to move their herd to better grazing. Thomas rode tall in his saddle, trying to mimic his father's easy posture, and Samuel felt pride swell in his chest. This was his legacy, not just the land or the herd, but this boy who worked hard and treated animals with kindness and looked at his father like he hung the moon. That same year, Zelda finally achieved a dream she had held since before Samuel met her. She opened a small dress shop in town. It was just one room attached to the general store, but it was hers, with her name painted on the sign. Samuel Foster's wife was now a businesswoman in her own right, and Samuel could not have been more proud. On their 10th wedding anniversary in December of 1894, Samuel and Zelda left the children with Mrs. Patterson for the night and rode out to the spot where their house stood. They had never done this before, never taken time just for themselves, and it felt both strange and wonderful. They spread a blanket on the porch and lay together under the stars, the December air cool but not cold. Zelda nestled against Samuel's side, her head on his chest. 10 years, she said wonderingly. "It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Samuel replied, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "Sometimes I still see you as that woman behind the general store, the one who tried to wave me away even though she was in agony. Other times it feels like we have always been together, like I cannot remember a version of my life that did not include you." "Do you ever regret it?" Zelda asked quietly. Giving up your freedom, your wandering, to settle down with a sick woman you barely knew. Samuel tilted her face up so he could look into her eyes. Not for one single second. Every choice I made that day, I would make again without hesitation. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda Foster. You and our children, this life we have built, it is everything I ever wanted even when I did not know how to want it. I love you, Zelda whispered. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Samuel replied. Always have, always will. They made love there on the porch under the stars, tender and passionate, their bodies familiar but never boring, always finding new ways to bring each other pleasure and comfort and joy. Afterwards, wrapped in blankets and each other, they talked until the sun began to lighten the eastern sky. The next decade brought both challenges and triumphs. In 1897, a hard winter killed 6 of their cattle, a financial blow that took months to recover from. But they tightened their belts and worked harder, and by the next spring they had rebuilt. In 1899, Thomas at 14 decided he wanted to learn his mother's trade alongside his father's, and Zelda began teaching him to sew. Samuel had worried briefly that his son might face teasing for such women's work, but Thomas had inherited both his parents' stubbornness and held his head high. Besides, there was nothing shameful about being able to mend your own clothes or create something beautiful with your hands. Sarah, meanwhile, showed a talent for working with horses that surprised everyone. By the time she was 10, she could gentle the most stubborn mount, and Samuel often took her with him when he worked with the herd. She rode like she had been born in a saddle, fearless and skilled. In 1902, as the century turned and the world seemed to speed up around them, Samuel and Zelda celebrated 20 years together. They were 46 and 41 respectively, their children growing toward adulthood, their life together a testament to the power of choosing each other every single day. They threw a party for the occasion, inviting everyone who had been part of their journey. Mrs. Patterson came, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever. Dr. Hayes attended with his wife, remarking that he had known when he saw Samuel stay outside that door that something special was beginning. Friends from the ranch, from town, from church, all gathered to celebrate this couple who had built something beautiful out of an act of kindness. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Thomas and Sarah presented their parents with a gift they had worked on together. A quilt made from scraps of fabric that represented different moments in the family's life. There were pieces from Zelda's wedding dress, from Thomas's baby clothes, from Samuel's work shirts, from Sarah's favorite childhood dress. Each square was carefully stitched together, the combined work of both children. "It is your story," Thomas said, suddenly looking much older than his 17 years. "Everything you have built, everything you have given us. We wanted to make something that honored that." Zelda wept openly, and Samuel had to clear his throat several times before he could speak. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he finally managed. "Thank you, both of you." That night, after everyone had gone and the children were asleep, Samuel and Zelda lay in their bed under the new quilt. "We did well," Zelda said softly. "With our children, with our life, we did well." "We did," Samuel agreed. "And it all started because I heard you fall and decided not to walk away." "Best decision you ever made?" Zelda asked with a smile. "Best decision I ever made," Samuel confirmed. As the years continued to pass, Samuel and Zelda watched their children grow into remarkable adults. Thomas married a lovely young woman named Emma in 1904, and they took over running Zelda's dress shop, expanding it into a thriving business. Sarah married in 1907 to a rancher named James, and they settled on land adjacent to Samuel and Zelda's property. building their own house and starting their own herd. In 1908, Samuel and Zelda became grandparents for the first time when Thomas and Emma welcomed a daughter they named Zelda in honor of her grandmother. Holding that tiny baby, Samuel felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that made his heart ache with fullness. More grandchildren followed. Thomas and Emma had 3 children in total, while Sarah and James had 4. The property that had once seemed so spacious now rang with the laughter of children and grandchildren, especially on Sundays when everyone gathered for dinner. Samuel had retired from ranch work in 1910, at the age of 54, choosing to focus entirely on their own land and on being present for his growing family. Zelda had similarly stepped back from the daily operations of the dress shop, though she still took on special projects when they interested her. One evening in the spring of 1914, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a sight they had witnessed thousands of times over the past 30 years, Samuel reached for Zelda's hand. It was lined now, marked by decades of work and life, but it fit in his just as perfectly as it always had. "Do you remember what you said to me on Mrs. Patterson's porch?" Samuel asked. "The first time you told me you loved me." "Every word," Zelda replied. "I was terrified. You said you were learning that hiding things only made them worse, that being vulnerable was not the same as being weak." Samuel squeezed her hand. "You taught me that, Zelda. You taught me that staying, that caring, that opening your heart even when it was scary was the bravest thing a person could do. You taught me I was worthy of being loved," Zelda said. "That I deserved dignity and care and a partner who would stand by me through anything. You taught me what it meant to be truly known by another person." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Around them, their land stretched out, the land they had worked and nurtured for 3 decades. In the distance, they could see smoke rising from Sarah and James's chimney. In town, Thomas and Emma were closing up the shop, heading home to their children. "I would do it all again," Samuel said suddenly. "Every moment, every choice, every challenge, I would do it all exactly the same because it led us here." "So would I," Zelda agreed. "Though maybe next time I would go to the doctor sooner and save you from having to carry me through town." Samuel laughed. "I did not mind carrying you. You were not that heavy." "Liar," Zelda said affectionately. They went inside as the last light faded, moving through their home with the ease of people who knew every inch of the space they inhabited. Samuel banked the fire while Zelda prepared tea, and they sat together at the kitchen table, the same table they had eaten at for 30 years. "What do you think the rest of our lives will look like?" Zelda asked. "More of this," Samuel replied contentedly. "Watching our grandchildren grow, helping out when we are needed, sitting on that porch and being grateful for every single day we get together. It sounds simple, but it is everything." "It is everything," Zelda echoed. That night, lying in their bed with Zelda curved against him, Samuel thought back to that afternoon in 1883 when he had heard a sound that changed his life. He had been 24 years old, drifting from job to job with no real purpose or plan. He had been content enough but not truly happy, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. And then he had found Zelda, collapsed and ashamed and in desperate need of help. He had made a choice in that moment to stay, to care, to refuse to let her face her pain alone. It had been the simplest thing in the world, and also the most important thing he had ever done. From that one act of compassion had flowed everything good in his life. Love and marriage and children and grandchildren and a home and a purpose. All of it traced back to the decision to pick up a suffering woman and carry her to safety, to sit outside a door and wait, to pay for medicine, and find a place for her to recover. He had saved her life, yes, but she had given him one worth living. As he drifted off to sleep with his wife in his arms, Samuel Foster felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for that day in October so long ago, gratitude for every day since, gratitude for the life they had built together out of vulnerability and kindness and love. In the darkness, Zelda's hand found his, their fingers intertwining automatically even in sleep. They had been doing this for 30 years, this silent reaching for each other, and Samuel hoped they would do it for 30 more. The years that followed were gentle ones, marked by the quiet joys of aging together. Samuel and Zelda watched their grandchildren grow and begin to show signs of who they would become. They attended weddings and baptisms and holiday celebrations, always surrounded by family. In the summer of 1920, when Samuel was 64 and Zelda was 59, they made a trip back to Kansas, so Samuel could see his sisters one last time before travel became too difficult. It was a reunion 37 years in the making, and the tears and laughter that flowed could have filled a river. Zelda fit seamlessly into his family, beloved by his sisters as much as Samuel had known she would be. On the train ride home, Zelda laid her head on Samuel's shoulder. "Thank you for taking me," she said. "I know how much it meant to you to see them again." "Thank you for coming with me," Samuel replied. "Thank you for everything, Zelda. For every day, every moment, every single breath we have taken together." They returned to Brownsville in the late summer, to their house and their land and their family. Thomas was running the dress shop with great success, expanding into mail-order business that served customers across Texas. Sarah and James's ranch was thriving, their children all learning the family business with enthusiasm. On a crisp October evening in 1923, 40 years to the day since Samuel had found Zelda behind the general store, their children organized a surprise celebration. The whole family gathered, 3 generations strong, to honor the love story that had started with an act of compassion and grown into something legendary. Thomas stood to give a toast, his voice strong and clear. 40 years ago today, my father heard a sound and made a choice. He could have ignored it, could have decided it was not his concern, could have walked away. But he did not. He found my mother in her darkest moment, and instead of judging her or abandoning her, he helped her. He carried her when she could not walk. He stayed when she thought she was alone. He treated her with dignity when she felt she had none. Thomas paused, emotion thickening his voice. And from that one choice, from that one act of kindness, came all of this. Our family, this life, everything we are and everything we have. It came from 2 people who chose each other every day for 40 years, who built something beautiful out of vulnerability and trust and love. He raised his glass. "To my parents, Samuel and Zelda Foster. Thank you for showing us what true love looks like. Thank you for being the foundation upon which we all stand." Everyone raised their glasses, a chorus of agreement and love filling the air. Samuel looked around at the faces of his children and grandchildren, all of them here, because he had made one choice on one October afternoon. It was humbling and overwhelming and absolutely perfect. Later, after everyone had gone home and it was just the 2 of them again, Samuel and Zelda returned to their porch. The same porch where they had shared their first kiss as a married couple, where they had celebrated victories and weathered storms, where they had watched their children and grandchildren play and grow. 40 years, Samuel said wonderingly. How did we get so lucky? It was not luck, Zelda replied. It was choice. Every single day we chose each other. We chose to stay, to work through problems instead of running from them, to love each other even when it was difficult. That is not luck. That is commitment. You are right, Samuel acknowledged. And I would make that same choice every time. I would choose you in every lifetime, in every circumstance. You are my home, Zelda. You always have been. And you are mine, Zelda said softly. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the gesture as natural now as breathing. Do you remember being afraid that day? When you found me, terrified, Samuel admitted. I did not know if you would live or die. I did not know if I was doing the right thing or making everything worse. But I knew I could not leave you there. I am so glad you did not. Zelda turned to look at him, her blue eyes still as captivating as they had been 40 years ago. I am so glad you stayed outside that door. I am so glad you gave me the chance to fall in love with you. They kissed soft and sweet, a kiss that held 40 years of love and commitment and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, Samuel stood and held out his hand. Dance with me, he said. There is no music, Zelda pointed out, but she was already standing, already moving into his arms. We will make our own, Samuel replied. And they did, swaying together on their porch under the stars, holding each other close and moving to a rhythm only they could hear. It was not graceful or elaborate, but it was theirs, just like everything else they had built together. As they danced, Samuel thought about all the things he wanted to tell his younger self, that lost 24-year-old who had been drifting through life without purpose. He wanted to tell him that it would all work out better than he could imagine. That the best thing he would ever do was stop and help someone in need. That vulnerability and courage were two sides of the same coin. That true love was not finding someone perfect, but finding someone worth fighting for and choosing them every single day. But he did not need to tell his younger self anything, because that man had made the right choice. He had stopped when he heard that sound. He had carried Zelda to the doctor and stayed outside the door. He had paid for her medicine and found her a place to recover. He had fallen in love with her strength and her vulnerability and her fierce determination to rebuild her life. And from that foundation, they had built everything. The song they danced to, the one only they could hear, played on into the night. And Samuel Foster held his wife close and was grateful, so grateful, for the sound that had changed his life, for the woman who had trusted him with her vulnerability, for the 40 years of love that had flowed from one moment of compassion. This was his legacy, he thought. Not the land or the herd or even the family, though all of those were precious. His legacy was the choice to stay, to care, to love without reservation. It was the example he had set for his children and grandchildren, the proof that kindness could change everything, that one person could make a difference. As they finally went inside, tired but happy, Samuel took one last look at the land they had built their life on. In 40 years, it had seen laughter and tears, triumphs and struggles, births and celebrations. It had been the foundation of their family, the place where their love story had taken root and flourished, and it had all started because he had refused to walk away. That night, lying in bed with Zelda's hand in his, Samuel closed his eyes and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new joys and new challenges, but tonight he rested in the certainty of their love. It was a love built on vulnerability and trust, on choosing each other every day, on the simple yet profound act of staying when it would have been easier to leave. It was the kind of love that lasted forever, and it was theirs.